Thank you. I'd like to share with you today how boredom has been a major inspiration in my life and in my work. If we go by Merriam-Webster, boredom means the state of being weary and restless through lack of interest. I think this is an outdated kind of quote on the internet. It should be updated, and I think it's also a lack of distractions today. When we are bored today, what do we do first? Get out our little iPhone and check our emails or whatever it is. So the lack of distraction, I think, is equally the reason why people are bored. Now, I was an expert of lack of distraction and boredom when I grew up in Germany long time ago. The city I grew up on is Bremen. And here you see Bremen, and as you can see, there is not much distraction up there. And I was lucky, or we were lucky, that our house wasn't destroyed, and it stood in a huge park, but I couldn't really play much in this park because when I grew up, it's always raining in Bremen. 6 weeks rain, non-stop. So I was really bored. I was actually double bored because my parents also didn't want to have a television. They didn't think that was cool. So I really was really having it up to here with everything. But thank God, I had my wonderful God-fearing mother, my aunt, Hedwig. She had a printing shop, and she supplied me with unlimited amount of paper. So I started to draw and create all these little stories, and I loved it. I discovered my passion and what I really love to do in my life. I decided when I grew up, I wanted to become a god, because gods are creating whole new worlds and universes and new characters and plots, and this is what I'm going to be. But when the time for me came to make my choices in career, I went to business school, and I became a business person. I moved to Africa, and there I worked in an office for many years. Eventually, I came to America, and I liked this place so much that I decided I would stay here. I got myself a green card, I rented a beach cottage, and I remembered my childhood dream to become a god. So I tried to start writing and illustrating children's books. And I was very lucky, the first 2 books sold immediately with the publisher. But then came the periods of waiting, the periods of utter boredom. See, when you are a writer, you are submitting new book proposals to your publishers, and they sit on it for weeks and weeks or months and months, and there isn't much else you can do than wait. So I was really bored. Again, I was double bored because I also didn't have a television. I saw some television here in America, and all I remembered were commercials for Preparation H and laxatives. And I thought, I'm too young for this. So suddenly I heard the story about Yuri Gagarin. You remember him, the guy who traveled around the world in outer space? Now the story goes that when he was in his little capsule, he suddenly heard this tapping on the outside of the capsule. Tap, 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 tap. He was getting nervous, and he looked at his instrument, he dismantled them to find the source, and he couldn't. And it continued, tap, tap, tap. And he realized that if this continues, on this whole journey, he is going mad, he's going crazy. And then he remembered the famous saying, what we resist persists. Although I think he remembered that in Russian. But so he decided to make friends with this tapping. He closed his eyes and really embraced the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. And as he was doing it, he had the inspiration that, hey, this tapping is the beat, the rhythm of a well-known Russian tune. And he started to hum it. And he started to sing it and then to whistle it. And he says this was his best companion on the entire trip. So I thought to myself, if big Yuri Gagarin can do it in outer space, I can do it here on Earth. So I took my boredom, and I felt it in my body, sat down, and I really showered it with love. And you know what happened? The charge, the intensity of boredom vanished. And it became merely a memory. And the moment it became a memory, it was no longer an active part in me. Whoosh! It opened up into the world for me, the world of Boris, the little bear. The bear who was very, very bored, and he lived with his little sister, and his sister was a busybody, and I could play with this whole subject, and out came the story of Totally Bored Boris. Now the next time, a week later, I was bored again. But this time it was different. I realized something very important. Boredom, as we heard earlier, is the state of a being weary and listless. But it's just the state. Underneath the state are all the emotions we do not wish to deal with, all the negative things, the subtle things, the things which we rather don't face. And this time the emotion was slightly different. It was a feeling of loneliness. Having lived in Africa with lots of friends and many fellow workers, I suddenly had chosen a profession which is very isolating, very lonely. Anybody who wants to become a writer, think about it twice. So there I was, and having this feeling of loneliness. So I sat down, and I really felt it in my body, allowed to feel it in my body, showered it with love, and it vanished. And the moment it did it, the world opened up for Chestnut, the little squirrel in the tree trunk, who was lonely. And he meets Morris, the otter. Of course, otters are never lonely. And out of this comes this fun little story, which is later called The Never Lonely Again. So it can continue. A week later, I had another feeling. I had a feeling on boredom which was slightly different. It was a feeling of loss. A dear friend with whom I made many walks on this, by the sea got married and moved away. And I felt the loss of this person very much so. So I sat down and allowed myself to really feel this feeling and loved it. And the moment I did, the charge and intensity of the feeling vanished and opened up the story of Brian and Warren. Brian was a white little duck, and Warren, his friend, was a wild duck, a mallet, and together they have these wonderful, fun adventures. Until one day, Warren says to Brian, you know, I'm going with my family down south for the winter. So the breakup or the challenge of this friendship, and they've got this wonderful experience with them. So this happened to me because I really was able to look at these emotions. You see, what I discovered is there are only two actions in the whole universe. One is the giving and sending of love or energy, and the other one is receiving and being open or crying out for love and energy. And obviously our so-called subtle negative emotions are just there to want to be loved, like any other kids or whatever want to be loved. And once we love it, they come down and they work. At least it worked for me. A little bit later, again, I had a subtle feeling of boredom, and I realized, what is this? It was actually a little self-doubt I had. I had to do a project I wasn't sure I could do. And once I sat down, felt it, allowed it in myself, again, the inspiration came with Josephine. Josephine was a little penguin who had to learn to dance ballet, and she didn't want to, and she thought she couldn't. But of course, in the end of the story, with lots of fun, she not only learns it, but she teaches all the other animals to do ballet too. So this is how it worked. So after a while, I had something like a dozen of these little stories together, all inspired through my feeling of boredoms. And I didn't know whether these stories were any good. But I took them to Random House anyway and showed them to them, and they just flipped over. They loved everything. They bought the whole lot. And then they asked me whether I would be prepared to start my own Hans Wilhelm book club. Well, that was quite an honor. And yes, and this is how the Merry-Tale, which we later called it, the book club started. Now, this all is a long, long time ago. This is something like 30 years plus ago, in the last century. Since then, things I have created, as I said, over 200 more books, and many of these books were initiated or inspired by moments of boredom. But my life has changed, like your life most likely has changed, because I sooner or later also got a television set. I got a computer, an iPad, an iPhone. And today, whenever I feel a little bit coming up of boredom in a checkout list or at the dentist's office, out comes the little distractor. And always a cat video to watch or whatever. The only time where we can't use our iPhone is actually in the shower. But that is, I think, only a question of time till Apple will have a shower-proof iPhone. And then we can text there and exchange some selfies. We have collectively given up the only luxury there is in life, which is time. So I have, to be really bored again, physically remove myself from the hectic East Coast, and I go to my studio in Jamaica. Here in Jamaica, in a small hotel, which has no television, no radio, and no hi-fi. I am allowing myself to be totally bored. Do you want to see my studio? This is my studio, and these are my feet. The walls are the sea, and the palm trees, and the ceiling is the sky. This is where I can still fully relax and really doodle and come up with new ideas. Now, I have no idea whether that what worked for me will also work for you. But if you want to try it out, simply saying, first of all, feel the feeling in your body. Don't think it, feel it. See where it is, and how it works, and then shower it with love as much as you can. And then be ready to be inspired, or I would say more poetically, be ready to be kissed by the muses. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.